The sound of my heels echoing through the empty hallway was the first sign that something was terribly wrong. I had just returned from a 5-day trip to New York, pitching designs to what could have been the biggest client of my career. My fingers were still cramping from clutching my portfolio on the plane, and all I wanted was to collapse into bed and tell my husband Marcus about how the presentation went. But when I pushed open the front door of our Victorian home in San Francisco, I was met with darkness and an unsettling silence. "Marcus?" I called out, flipping on the light switch in the foyer. Nothing. The house felt hollow, like all the warmth had been sucked out of it. I pulled my suitcase inside and noticed something white on the entry table. A note, written in my sister-in-law Vivian's sharp handwriting. "Handle the old man. We're at the cabin. Don't call." My blood ran cold. The old man. That's what Vivian had started calling Grandpa Vinny over the past few months, ever since his Parkinson's diagnosis made his hands shake too much to hold a coffee cup without spilling. I'd caught her rolling her eyes when he'd forget what day it was, heard her whisper to Marcus about how inconvenient it was to have him living here. But Marcus always defended his grandfather. At least, I thought he did. I dropped my bags and ran through the house, checking every room. "Grandpa Vinny? Where are you?" The kitchen was spotless, too spotless. No dishes in the sink, no half-finished cup of tea on the counter where he always left one. His bedroom was empty, the bed made with military precision, which was strange because Grandpa Vinny's trembling hands usually left the blankets rumpled. That's when I heard it, a faint thumping sound coming from the garage. I rushed through the kitchen and threw open the door to the garage. The cold hit me immediately. The temperature had dropped into the 40s that week, and someone had left the side door wide open. And there, in the corner near my husband's workbench, I found him. Grandpa Vinny was curled up on the concrete floor, his thin cardigan pulled tight around his shoulders, his whole body shaking. Not from the Parkinson's this time, from the cold. His lips had a bluish tint, and when his eyes met mine, they were filled with something I'd never seen in them before. Fear. "Oh my God! Grandpa!" I dropped to my knees beside him, pulling off my coat to wrap around him. His skin was ice cold. "How long have you been out here?" His hand, trembling more than usual, gripped my wrist with surprising strength. "Sophia," he whispered, his voice hoarse. They took my blueprints. Help me stop them. I know you're the only one who cares." Blueprints? I had no idea what he was talking about, but that didn't matter right now. I needed to get him warm, get him his medication. I helped him to his feet, shocked at how light he felt, like he'd lost 20 pounds since I'd left on Monday. When had he last eaten? I got him into the house, wrapped him in blankets, and made him hot tea with shaking hands. While the kettle boiled, I searched for his medications. His pill organizer was empty. Every single compartment. I checked the cabinet where we kept his prescriptions. Gone. All of them. "Grandpa, where are your pills?" I asked, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. He looked at me with those roomy brown eyes, the ones that had always been so kind, and I saw tears forming. Vivian said, I didn't need them anymore. She said I was taking too many, that they were making me confused. She took them 3 days ago. 3 days. 3 days without his Parkinson's medication, without his blood pressure pills, without anything. And they'd left him in a cold garage while they went to the cabin for what? A vacation? I called Marcus. It went straight to voicemail. I called Vivian. Same thing. I even tried calling Marcus's business partner Derek, thinking maybe he'd know where they were. Nothing. Fine. I'd take Grandpa Vinny to the hospital myself. The emergency room doctor looked at me with barely concealed anger when she came out of the examination room 3 hours later. "Mrs. Chen, your grandfather-in-law is severely dehydrated and malnourished. His potassium levels are dangerously low. We found traces of Ambien in his system at levels that suggest he's been given more than the prescribed dose. Do you know anything about this?" I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Ambien? He doesn't take Ambien, and I've been out of town since Monday. I just found him tonight. The doctor's expression softened slightly. I see. Well, we're going to need to keep him for observation. I've also contacted Adult Protective Services. This appears to be a case of elder neglect, possibly abuse. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Abuse. My husband and his sister were abusing Grandpa Vinny, the man who had welcomed me into this family when no one else did. The man who had taught me to see beauty in architectural details, who had spent hours with me in his workshop, showing me how to sketch building facades, who had told me on my wedding day that I was the best thing that ever happened to Marcus. I stayed at the hospital until Grandpa Vinny fell asleep, his hand clasped in mine. A nurse told me quietly that they'd found bruises on his arms, the kind that come from being grabbed roughly, pressure sores from sitting too long in one position, signs that someone had been controlling when and what he ate. When I finally got home at 2 a.m, I sat in my car in the driveway for a long time, staring at the house. This beautiful Victorian house that Grandpa Vinny had bought in 1970 when this neighborhood was still affordable for a young architect. The house he'd raised his family in, the house where he'd drawn thousands of sketches at the dining room table, the house that was now worth over $8 million because of its location in Pacific Heights. And suddenly, I understood. This wasn't about the house being inconvenient or Grandpa Vinny being a burden. This was about money. This was about Marcus and Vivian wanting to get rid of him so they could sell this house and split the fortune. I thought about the blueprints Grandpa Vinny had mentioned. I'd always known he was an architect, but I'd never really understood the scope of his work. He was retired before I met Marcus, and he mostly talked about his hobby of making wooden toys for the children's hospital. But sometimes, late at night, when it was just the two of us having tea, he'd mention projects he'd worked on. Something about city planning, about structures beneath the city. I'd never paid much attention. I went inside and straight to his workshop in the basement. Grandpa Vinny had shown me this space once, shortly after Marcus and I got married. It was his sanctuary, filled with decades of architectural sketches, models, and tools. I'd asked him once why he kept making wooden toys when he used to design buildings, and he'd smiled and said, "Because buildings are for everyone to see, but toys are secrets between me and the children. I like having secrets." Secrets. I started searching through his workshop, carefully at first, then more frantically. I opened drawers, looked behind cabinets, checked under the workbench. Nothing that looked like blueprints. Just toys in various stages of completion. A wooden train, a puzzle box, a carousel that actually spun. And then I saw it. The carousel was more elaborate than the others. It had intricate details carved into every horse, every pole. I picked it up, admiring the craftsmanship, and something rattled inside. There was a small panel on the base that slid open when I pushed it just right, and inside, rolled up tight, was a set of blueprints printed on old-fashioned vellum. I spread them out on the workbench, and my breath caught. These weren't plans for a building. These were plans for something underneath the city. Tunnels, connections, an entire network of underground passages that seemed to link major points throughout San Francisco. At the top, in faded ink, it said, SF Underground Infrastructure, Emergency Transit Network, Classified, V. Chen, Lead Architect, 1985. My hands were shaking as I took out my phone and started taking pictures of every page. I didn't understand exactly what I was looking at, but I understood enough. Grandpa Vinny hadn't just been an architect. He'd been the architect who designed secret infrastructure for the city. And if Marcus and Vivian had known about this, if they'd managed to get their hands on these plans, I thought about Derek, Marcus's business partner. They were real estate developers, always looking for the next big project, the next loophole, the next way to cut corners and maximize profits. If they knew about tunnels and underground networks, they could potentially exploit that information to get building permits in places that shouldn't be developed, to build foundations that violated safety codes, to make millions while putting the entire city at risk. I needed proof. I needed to know exactly what they were planning. The next morning, I went back to the hospital and sat with Grandpa Vinny while he ate breakfast. Real food, finally. He looked better already, some color returning to his cheeks. I told him I'd found the blueprints. His eyes lit up with something between relief and worry. Did they get them? Marcus and Vivian? No, I said. But they were looking for them, weren't they? That's why they went through your workshop. That's why they... I couldn't finish the sentence. He nodded slowly. I heard them talking a few weeks ago. Vivian found some old articles about my work with the city. She figured out that I had the original plans for the underground network. She wanted me to give them to her, said she could preserve them properly. But I knew what they wanted to do with them. What happened when you refused? His hand trembled as he set down his fork. That's when things got bad. Marcus started saying I was getting too confused to take care of myself. Vivian said I needed to be in a facility. They started controlling my medications, my food. They said it was for my own good, but I knew they were trying to make me weak enough that I'd sign whatever they put in front of me. Sign what? Power of attorney. A new will. Papers that would let them sell the house and move me to a nursing home. Once I was out of the way, they could do whatever they wanted with the blueprints. He looked at me with those sharp eyes that I now realized had never been confused at all. But they underestimated you, Sophia. They thought you'd stay in New York longer. They thought they'd have more time. I squeezed his hand. I need to get proof of what they're planning. Proof that will hold up in court. He smiled, that gentle smile that had always made me feel safe. I taught you to see details that others miss. You'll figure it out. I went home that afternoon with a plan. I stopped at an electronics store and bought 4 small cameras with motion sensors, the kind that people use for home security. Then I went through the house and installed them in places that wouldn't be obvious. Behind a picture frame in the living room, on a bookshelf in Marcus's office, in the kitchen where I knew they'd have conversations, and one in the garage where they'd left Grandpa Vinny. Then I waited. Marcus and Vivian came home 2 days later, laughing and relaxed from their trip to the cabin, which I'd discovered through social media was actually a luxury resort in Napa. They found me in the kitchen, making dinner as if nothing had happened. "Babe, you're back!" Marcus kissed my cheek, and I had to fight every instinct not to pull away. "How was New York?" "Good," I said, keeping my voice steady. "How was your trip?" "Much needed," Vivian said, dropping her designer bag on the counter. "Where's the old man?" "If you mean Grandpa Vinny, he's at the hospital." The color drained from Marcus's face. "What? Why?" I turned to look at him, really look at him, and saw it clearly for the first time. The guilt, the fear of being caught. I found him in the garage when I got home, hypothermic, dehydrated, and without his medications. The doctors said it looked like neglect. "That's ridiculous," Vivian snapped. "He was fine when we left. He probably just wandered out there himself. You know how confused he gets." The doctors also found high levels of Ambien in his system. Grandpa Vinny doesn't have a prescription for Ambien. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, then said, "Maybe he got into something by mistake. We should talk to his doctor about adjusting his medications." "His medications that mysteriously disappeared from the house?" "Sophia, I don't like what you're implying," Vivian said, her voice cold. "We've been taking care of that old man for years. If he got into something he shouldn't have, that's not our fault." I wanted to scream at her, to tell her I knew exactly what they'd done, but I needed them to think I was still in the dark. I needed them to feel safe enough to continue planning, to talk about their scheme where my cameras could record every word. "You're right," I said, forcing an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry. I'm just worried about him. The hospital wants to keep him for a few more days for observation." I watched relief flood both their faces. A few more days. A few more days to execute whatever plan they had in motion. That night, I heard them talking in Marcus's office. I was in bed, pretending to be asleep, but I had my phone on and the camera app open, watching the live feed. "She doesn't know anything," Marcus said. "She bought the whole confused old man story." "Good," that was Vivian's voice. "Derek's meeting with the Planning Commission next week. Once we have the variants approved, we'll need those blueprints to show the structural engineers. We can build 3 stories deeper than code usually allows if we can prove there's existing infrastructure." "And Grandpa?" "Derek's got a facility lined up. Once we get him to sign the POA, we move him there. They're very discreet about their care. Patients often decline quickly." My stomach turned. They were planning to put him in a place where he would decline quickly, where he might not come out at all. "What about Sophia?" Marcus asked, and my heart stopped. "What about her? She's so busy with her little graphic design projects, she barely pays attention to family business. Once this is done, you can give her whatever story you want. Maybe Grandpa wanted to move to a facility. Maybe he was happier there. She'll believe you. She always does. I had to bite my lip to keep from screaming. This man I'd been married to for 4 years, who I'd loved and trusted, was talking about me like I was an inconvenient obstacle, like I was stupid. Over the next week, I collected evidence like I was building a legal case, because that's exactly what I was doing. The cameras recorded Vivian and Derek meeting at the house, going through Grandpa Vinny's workshop, getting frustrated when they couldn't find the blueprints. I recorded Marcus on the phone with the discreet facility, discussing how much they charged to manage difficult patients. I found emails on Marcus's laptop between him and Derek, discussing how they'd split the profits from the property development deal that hinged on those blueprints. The most damning evidence came from a conversation I recorded between Vivian and Derek in the kitchen. I'd come home early from a supposed meeting with a client and caught them there. "We need to move faster," Derek was saying. "If someone from the city finds out about those old plans, they'll lock them up in archives. This is our only window." "I know," Vivian said, "but the old man is being stubborn. Even weak and drugged up, he won't sign anything. Then we make him weaker." Derek's voice was cold. "Your brother needs to grow a spine and handle this. We've come too far to let one senile old man ruin everything." That's when Vivian said the words that made my blood run cold. "Marcus is handling it. When Grandpa gets released from the hospital, there's going to be an unfortunate accident, a fall down the stairs. At his age, with his condition, no one will question it. We'll be the grieving family, and the house will be ours." I stood frozen in the hallway, my hand over my mouth to keep from gasping. They were planning to murder him, not just neglect him, not just let him decline. They were planning to kill Grandpa Vinny. I'd heard enough. That night, I made copies of everything. Every video, every email, every text message. I put them on 3 separate flash drives, one for the police, one for my lawyer, and one for my own protection. Then I called the one person I knew I could trust, my brother James, who was a prosecutor in the DA's office. "Jamie, I need help," I said when he answered, "and I need you to not ask questions until I show you everything." 2 days later, I sat in a conference room at the police station with James, 2 detectives, and a representative from Adult Protective Services. I showed them everything: the videos, the emails, the texts. The detective who specialized in elder abuse looked physically ill by the time we finished. "Mrs. Chen, this is one of the most clear-cut cases I've seen," she said. "We have conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, theft, and what appears to be conspiracy to commit murder. We'll need your grandfather-in-law's testimony as well." "He's ready," I said. "He's been ready." The detective leaned forward. "There's one more thing we need. We need to catch them in the act. Your evidence is strong, but if we can get them to attempt to execute their plan with officers present, it becomes an open and shut case." I understood what she was asking. "You want me to help set them up?" "Only if you're comfortable. You'd be wearing a wire, and we'd have officers stationed nearby. The moment things go too far, we intervene." I thought about Grandpa Vinny, about how he'd welcomed me into this family, about how he'd taught me to notice the small details in architecture, the way a building tells a story, about how he'd been there for me when my own father had passed away, stepping into that role without hesitation, about the wooden toys he made for sick children, keeping his secrets, spreading joy even when his own family was trying to destroy him. "I'll do it," I said. The plan was simple. Grandpa Vinny would be released from the hospital and return home. I would act like everything was normal. We'd wait for Marcus, Vivian, and Derek to make their move. And when they did, the police would be ready. Grandpa Vinny came home on a Friday afternoon. Marcus and Vivian were already there, all fake smiles and concern. "Grandpa, it's so good to have you home," Marcus said, helping him to his favorite chair. "We were so worried," Vivian added, and I marveled at how convincing she sounded. That evening, I made dinner for everyone. I set the table, served the food, played the role of the dutiful wife and daughter-in-law. Under my cardigan, I wore a wire. Outside, in unmarked cars, 3 police officers waited. After dinner, Marcus suggested Grandpa Vinny might want to rest upstairs. "Let me help you up," he said, offering his arm. "Actually, I left some papers in my workshop I wanted to show Sophia." Grandpa Vinny said, playing his part perfectly. Some old sketches she might like for her portfolio. I can get them for you, Grandpa, Vivian said quickly. No. I want to pick them out myself. Sophia, will you help me down the stairs? I supported his arm as we walked slowly toward the basement stairs. Behind us, I heard Marcus and Vivian whispering urgently, then footsteps following us. We just reached the top of the basement stairs when it happened. I felt hands on my back, shoving hard. I stumbled forward, instinctively grabbing the railing, but Grandpa Vinny wasn't so lucky. He tumbled down 3 stairs before I managed to catch him, both of us ending up in a heap on the landing. "Oh no!" Vivian's voice rang out, dripping with false concern. "He fell! Marcus, call 911!" But I was already pulling out my phone, not to call 911, but to signal the police. "I don't think we need an ambulance," I said, standing up and helping Grandpa Vinny to his feet. He was shaken, but unharmed, just as we'd planned. But we definitely need the police, because that wasn't a fall. That was attempted murder. The color drained from Vivian's face. "What are you talking about?" He lost his balance. "I felt you push me," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "And I have it on video, just like I have everything else on video. Every conversation, every plan, every admission of what you were going to do to Grandpa Vinny." Marcus stepped forward. "Sophia, you're being paranoid." "Am I?" I pulled out my phone and played one of the videos. Vivian's voice filled the room. "When Grandpa gets released from the hospital, there's going to be an unfortunate accident. A fall down the stairs. The front door burst open, and 3 officers rushed in. Marcus Chen, Vivian Chen, Derek Liu, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, elder abuse, fraud, and attempted murder." I watched as they handcuffed my husband, his sister, and Derek. Vivian was screaming about lawyers and wrongful arrest. Derek was silent, his face ashen. But Marcus looked at me with such hatred that I barely recognized him. "You ruined everything," he said. "That old man is worthless, and you chose him over me." "No," I said quietly. "You chose money over family. I just chose family over you." The trial took 8 months. During that time, I learned things about Grandpa Vinny that I'd never known. He wasn't just an architect who'd worked on city infrastructure. He was Vincent Chen, the legendary phantom planner who had designed San Francisco's emergency underground transit network in the 1980s, a classified project that would serve as evacuation routes in case of major earthquakes. His blueprints were government property, and Marcus, Vivian, and Derek's scheme to use them for private development was federal fraud on top of everything else. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Marcus got 12 years. Vivian, who had masterminded much of the plan, got 15. Derek got 10. All 3 were also convicted on federal charges, which would add more time to their sentences. The house, it turned out, was actually in a trust that Grandpa Vinny had set up years ago. Marcus had never had any legal claim to it. After the trial, Grandpa Vinny updated the trust to leave the house to me, with the stipulation that it be preserved as a historical landmark and that part of it be opened as a museum showcasing architectural history and the importance of city planning. I divorced Marcus while he was awaiting trial. He never apologized, never showed remorse. The man I thought I'd married had maybe never existed at all. Now, a year later, I stand in what used to be the living room of the Victorian house and watch as visitors walk through the new museum exhibit. There are displays of Grandpa Vinny's sketches, models of his projects, and a whole section dedicated to the toys he makes for children's hospitals. He still lives upstairs, still makes his wooden toys, still has tea with me every evening. Last week, a little girl came to the museum with her mother. She'd been one of the children who received Grandpa Vinny's toys when she was sick. She's healthy now, and she brought him a drawing she'd made of the toy carousel he'd given her. Grandpa Vinny's hands shook as he took it, but his eyes were bright and clear. "Thank you," he told her. "I'll treasure this." After they left, he turned to me. "You know, Sophia, I worked on buildings and infrastructure for 40 years. I helped design systems that protect millions of people. But do you know what I'm most proud of?" "What?" I asked. that I taught you to see what others miss, that I helped you find the strength you didn't know you had. That's the real legacy. Not buildings or blueprints or money. It's the people we protect and the values we pass on. I hugged him tight. This man who'd become more of a father to me than a grandfather. I learned from the best, I whispered. He patted my back with his trembling hands. No, my dear, you always had it in you. I just gave you permission to use it. Later that evening, as I locked up the museum section and headed upstairs to our living quarters, I thought about everything that had happened, about how I'd almost lost Grandpa Vinny to greed and cruelty, about how the people I'd trusted most had betrayed not just him, but everything that family should mean. But I also thought about the families who visit the museum, the children who play with Grandpa Vinny's toys, the architecture students who study his designs. I thought about the legacy we were building together, not of wealth or property, but of care and creativity and standing up for what's right. As I passed by the wall where we'd hung some of Grandpa Vinny's original sketches, I noticed he'd added a new piece. It was a drawing of the house, but incorporated into the architectural details were tiny figures. A young woman helping an old man down the stairs, the same woman standing up to 3 shadowy figures. And finally, the woman and the old man together, surrounded by children and light. At the bottom, in his shaky handwriting, he'd written, "The strongest foundations aren't made of concrete and steel. They're made of courage and love." I smiled, touching the frame gently. He was right, as always, and I was going to make sure that foundation stood for generations to come.